Well, good afternoon, everybody. My goal in these few minutes is to help you talk to one another without hurting each other. I have been asked to remind you of some principles that I'm sure that you already know. When I was in seminary, first I took it as a field education placement, and later I took a job there. It was at the Neighborhood Justice Center of Atlanta while I was at Candler School of Theology. And so then I got trained as a state certified mediator for the state of Georgia. When I came back to Tulsa to take my appointment, I loved it so much that I became a state certified mediator for the state of Oklahoma through Project Settlement in Tulsa. And then, like many of you, I went through the Lombard Mennonite Peace Training, which was wonderful if you have not done it. And it's a good thing I did, because in the last 33 years, I have certainly seen my share of conflict. I had a particular appointment for several years that had quite a bit of conflict in it when we started. Some people in the church were not sure they were going to stay in the church. The pastor was not sure she was going to stay at the church. But we entered into a time of prayer and seeking, and the more I prayed about it and the more I thought about it, I got this question: what if we all stayed? Novel. What if we all stayed and worked it out? What if we pushed through? Could we find ourselves in a new place of ministry, perhaps on the other side of the river, so to speak, Bishop? And that is when I started my season of expertise in the principles of leading a group through spiritual discernment. I'm not presenting today on the principles of spiritual discernment, though that is my favorite topic on which to speak. So behind the two front pages of your handout, if you would make sure everyone has a handout at this time, we're just going to talk about the first two pages, but behind the first two pages, you will see three methods for corporate discernment that I'm not reviewing today. It is my life goal to get these three models into as many hands as humanly possible. So that's why you have them today. I offer myself as a free resource as you take those home with you and begin to experiment with them. As long as there are people on the earth, there will be the question, how do we deal with our disagreements and our differences? It is a question that comes up in your home, in your marriage, with your children. We are continually negotiating. Where do you want to have dinner? You have to go to bed now. You left the garage door open again. How many times have I asked you to fix that window? So it certainly happens in our families, and it definitely happens in our churches, from the smallest to the largest of issues. We disagree. We do not think alike, we do not believe alike about everything. Why else would John Wesley say it, that beautiful quote? Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike? May we not be of one heart, though we are not of one opinion? And then he says this, do you believe him? Without all doubt, we may. That's what he says. So how many times have you been in a church meeting when the topic for discussion comes up and it's one with varying opinions? And there's not much conversation, and there's a call for the vote, and most people vote in favor of the proposal, and it passes. And then after the meeting, your inbox fills up, or you see people, perhaps immediately after the meeting, you're going out to your car and you see people over at their cars going, and you realize people had feelings and opinions and emotions, and they did not express them at the time that was invited to express them. Why not? I think there are several reasons. They may not have felt like their voice was very important. They may not have felt like it was safe. They might have felt like they were too emotional, too angry to say anything. We do not want people to be silent when we meet. We do not want people to be silent this afternoon when we talk, because we need everybody. We need everyone. Here's how I like to say it. Pray up, study up, speak up. Pray up, study up, speak up. And there is a reason we need you to speak up. If you are quiet, we will lose the good ideas that come when every person participates. It will lower the creativity of the group. If you are a quiet person, when you find yourself in a group, we would ask you to explore why you are that way. Some people do not want to draw attention to themselves. Some are introverts. Some don't want to hurt other people's feelings. Others don't want to get hurt if they say something and someone else says something back to them. Or let's say it is the opposite. You have been in a meeting where difference of opinion was expressed and it was done in a way that was very harmful or damaging, not only for those in the room, but for anybody else who heard about it, because you know everybody heard about it. So today, I am offering you a few reminders that I think will help us this afternoon, really, and in any setting, whether it's personal for you or in a corporate setting where there is conflict. Managing conflict does not come naturally, but it can be learned. Principle number 1, whatever the outcome, the experience should not damage the relationship between the parties. I'm not on the handout just yet. Principle number 1, whatever the outcome, the experience should not damage the relationship between the parties. And I would even go further to say this. Managing conflict can actually improve the relationship between two parties if you do this well. Principle number 2, choose dialogue over debate. And what's the difference? Debate focuses on positions. So your job becomes to do one of 3 things. Defend your position, persuade other people to agree with your position, or at the very least, hold your position. And when you focus primarily on your position, you are usually trying, by argument, by logic, by force, by intimidation, to get the other party to agree with you or do something that you want them to do. So this is what we call positioning, and it's a contest of wills. And when you position, it's very difficult to find a resolution. Someone once asked why the United Nations has such trouble making decisions. And the answer was that there are over 150 countries coming together, and each one has arrived with a predetermined position. The concept of debate then would use words like entrenched, closed, persuasive, convincing. Dialogue, on the other hand, has as its main objective the understanding of the other person. The idea of dialogue, at its very best, means that you will work to hear and see the situation through the eyes of the other person. You will try to understand what they're thinking and why they feel the way they do. The goal of dialogue is to walk in the other person's shoes, to understand their ideas and beliefs and their motivations. Dialogue uses words like creative, cooperative, open, factual, relationship. I have been your delegate to General Conference many times. Delegates sit together in a roped-off area, and if you want to send a note to another delegate, you can. You write it, you raise it, and a page will come. It's just kind of like you're at the Legislative House in Washington. You raise it, and the page takes it to the other person. And so you can send notes, any kind of note, to another person. And if someone outside the bar of the conference wants to send a note to you as a delegate, they can. And so we get notes from people beyond the bar when we are delegates at General Conference. Sometimes they are notes from people who are lobbying for a position. And so one afternoon, I got this note. Dear Jessica, I hope God changes your heart on resolution number so-and-so. and then some other really harsh sentences. So I looked at the name, I didn't recognize it. It said Illinois Great River Annual Conference. So I looked in the delegate directory and her name was not there. And at the break, I went over and said to the chair of their delegation, do you see this person in the room anywhere? Oh yeah, she's here. See that yellow dress? She's in the yellow dress up in the gallery. Okay, so I wrote a note. Hi, I got your note. I don't believe I've met you. I would be interested in hearing your story. I could meet you at the water fountain at the dinner break. I got a page. I said, see the woman in the yellow dress? That's where this goes. So I watched him climbing up there. And then there was a note back. I will meet you. And then she wrote, no one has ever written me back before. So we met at the water fountain, and for 45 minutes we talked, and at the end I felt like I had a new friend. We just told our stories, and here's how I like to talk about that conversation. It went from darts to dialogue. So she started with a dart. I replied with a dialogue invitation. You would be amazed at how much new information comes when people listen to each other. People are able to tell their story and talk about why they feel the way that they do. You will sometimes learn that the motive for what they are doing is not the motive you thought it was. In mediation, we require that people listen to each other. So it's a very regimented experience for all parties concerned. They have to describe back to one another. They first have to write it down, and then they have to say back to the person what they have heard. And I will just tell you, after doing this for 25 years, sometimes that is all it takes. How many times have I heard someone just say back, yes, that's what I've been trying to say to you. All this time, that is what I've been trying to say to you. Sometimes I'll hear, well, I had no idea. Sometimes, well, I didn't understand that about you. And then often, well, I thought you were trying to say something else to me. The third fundamental principle is separating people from issues. So our egos and our emotions can become entangled with our position. I remember mediating between two men who lived next door to one another. One man was going out in the morning. He pulled his car out to the very end of his driveway when he remembered that he had forgotten his wallet. So he left his car parked kind of cattywampus and turned on and just ran inside to get his wallet. That happened to be the time that his next door neighbor, whose driveway was parallel to it, backed up and backed into his car. And so the turning point in the mediation was when the neighbor, whose car was parked, said, I don't mind paying for the damage on your car, but it was when you called me a stupid idiot that I wanted you to pay. So he said, you're not a stupid idiot. I was surprised that it happened. I was angry. So the problem was not actually with the car damage at all. The problem was you called him a stupid idiot. And so the guy who backed up said, well, I shouldn't have said it that way. I'm sorry, I was upset. And the guy with the parked car said, it's okay, I'll pay for the damage. And the other guy said, no, it's okay, I'll pay for the damage. No, I'll pay for the damage. Hey, was it about the damage? They split the cost. Also, many times there is a big history that has happened before the conflict presents itself. So someone has been previously offended about something else, or someone not involved at all was offended. So I know this sounds far-reaching, but the best case scenario is when we move from being on the opposite side of a problem to seeing ourselves on the same side tackling the problem. That it's the two parties together against the problem. It's not the two parties against each other. I know that sounds far-reaching, but it can happen. From all of my 25 years of training and mediation, I've come to a few basic principles about how people get along. Number one, people want to be fully heard. The person with whom you disagree wants to be fully heard by you. 2, people want to be respected. 3, people usually want to be appreciated. So let's turn to the handout. I have made the first 2 pages of this handout non-specific enough that you may take it and reproduce it as you like. You have my permission to use these first 2 pages front and back, as long as you include the bibliography, please. And as we go through a few of these steps, you may say, you really think I'm going to be able to do that when I am upset? And the truth is that you may not be able to do any of these steps if your emotions are running hot, if the facts are a little bit slippery, or if somebody's trying to shut down communication. So when tension is high and things feel like they are spinning out of control, I'll just tell you the very best thing to do is to stop. Just don't do it right now. Let yourself calm down. And that goes against what most of us want to do in the moment. Usually in the moment, we feel compelled to talk louder and faster and more urgently and more persuasively to make a greater argument for our cause. And this is the moment in which you have the highest potential of harming another person. This is when you actually harm the relationship. Number 1, take time for prayer and reflection throughout the following steps. So if I could just say one thing today, it would be that. Take time for prayer and reflection. Define the actual concern or disagreement. Separate issues from one another. Assess your own motives. Why do I feel so strongly about this? Determine what part of it is your own baggage. Has this person caused you other pain? Is this issue tangled up in other issues? Has this been building up because of other experiences? Attempt to identify your own emotions. Anger, embarrassment, rejection, fear of loss of control over a situation, that's huge. So your emotions are yours. They are what they are. They're normal. Just go ahead and feel them. And as they begin to cool, see if you can test the reality of the situation. Did you project onto the situation details that are actually not there? Did you make inferences? Does conversation about this topic connect to your ego in some way? If you are defensive, ask yourself, why am I so defensive about this? And here's one of my favorite little sentences from John Gottman. When you are furious, you cannot be curious. Determine whether or not you have all the information that you need to have about the conversation. What you'll see over in the steps for spiritual discernment is that the first thing is that you've got to have all the data. If you do not have all the information, wait till you've got it. And this one's so important. Resolve to care for the relationship. And to do that, you really need to focus on dialogue and not debate. See if there is a log in your own eye. Identify and own up to the ways in which you have contributed to the conflict. Work to find non-inflammatory language to describe your emotions. Determine how you might help the other person walk in your shoes. Plan the time for the conversation. So do it at a time when you are both rested and likely to respond well to the other person. And if you can, keep it as private as possible. Ask permission rather than just coming to a person and saying, I need to talk to you and I need to talk to you now. You could say something like, I have something to talk to you about. It's sensitive. Would it be okay if we talked about it? What would be a good time? Because that's going to set the whole tone for the entire conversation. Affirm the relationship in a way that is comfortable for you. So say something true about the situation. Why are you wanting to talk about it anyway? Is it because you are important to me? Is it because our friendship is important? Is it because I respect you? Is it, well, I think we have completely misunderstood each other. I do not want to be at odds with you. So those might not be your sentences. You'll have different ones, but just speak from your heart. Define the actual concern or disagreement and then stick to that. So if something else comes up, just say, well, let's note that for later. We'll talk about that another time. And then I'm going to offer you now the principles of reflective listening, also called active listening. Each person strives to speak carefully using language about you and not about the other person. So describe what you have experienced and how you feel. Describe the outcome you want to see, and take care not to accuse or inflame. So just be very clear. This is what I hope could happen in the end. 2, listen very carefully. And the way that you show that you have heard it is that you say it back to the person. If you don't fully understand, ask questions. Listen with empathy. Do you understand what the other person has experienced? Do you know why that person feels the way they do? Do you know exactly what the other person wants? This is a huge piece of mediation, is if we can find out what each party wants, then we're starting somewhere. And I printed this paragraph for you because it's so lovely. Empathetic listening, also called active listening and reflective listening, is a way of responding to another person with the goal of genuine understanding. It enables the listener to receive and accurately interpret the speaker's message. When well done, empathetic listening builds trust and respect, enables the disputants to release their emotions, reduces tension, encourages the surfacing of information, and creates a safe environment that is conducive to collaboration and problem solving. Is that what you want? Isn't it a wonderful paragraph? All right, just a few tips for you. Do not be formulating your next thought while a person is speaking. I know that's really hard. Are you human? That means there might be times of silence. When I begin a mediation, I try to warn a person, silence is a good thing. So if you both have silence at a time, it means that you've been listening and not formulating your next thought. Control the urge to tell your side before you have displayed that you understand the other person. Demonstrate that you are genuinely interested in the other person's views by restating the position in your own words. Ask the other person to correct your understanding of his or her thoughts and feelings. And then just simple courtesies. Impatient people look at their phones to see what time it is, look at their watches, they interrupt, they ask other people to hurry up, they tap their feet, they don't let a person finish a sentence, they don't let a person finish a line of thinking. Be aware if you do these things and just on purpose, you can actually add a few seconds to your normal response. Have you ever had self-talk when you're listening to someone who really does talk a lot? Sometimes I say to myself, nod your head. Don't say anything. Just keep your mouth shut. Listen, what's she saying? Think, concentrate, look at her eyes. Those are simple courtesies. Be willing to pause before speaking to make sure the other person is finished. That's just a good way to do that. Begin to seek solutions that have the interests of both parties in mind. When one person offers a solution, I will have the other person state the possible solution back so that I know that the possible solution has been fully heard, and so they can take time to think about it. And then you can modify the solution. Someone says, I think this is the solution, and the other person says, I hear that you think that's the solution, so I'm thinking maybe that plus this, or that minus this. So what you're looking for is a creativity and a reaching beyond what has been so far to see if you can find common ground. Know your own hot buttons, take breaks if it gets out of control. Breaks will help you reconsider options. That funny is that if I will tell people, so we're going to just have a 15-minute break and you all have to go outside and come back inside in 15 minutes. You'd be so surprised when they come back in, well, I think I'm ready to do it, whatever it was. Don't rush the process. Allow time to thoroughly define the problem, all the nuances, and brainstorm the alternatives. When a conflict is beginning, both sides do not have the entire picture, but as the process unfolds and new information comes out, a lot of times viable solutions present themselves. It's quite wonderful when it happens. So when those solutions present, we try to just validate and affirm the areas of agreement rather than focusing on the issues of disagreement. Be willing to break the problem into smaller parts, to reframe the issues, to put them in a different perspective. Can you stay optimistic about the chances for success? Let me read this sentence to you. One of the biggest obstacles to conflict resolution is the belief that any particular conflict cannot be solved. So if you are in the room today thinking that what we're going to talk about this afternoon has no solution, then that's a problem. We are not finished with this conversation. We're just really beginning the extent of this conversation. If you've decided ahead of time there's no use in working on it, then you're in trouble already. And here's an important sentence along the way: offer and receive forgiveness as needed. Sometimes at the end of a mediation, I will say, all right, so sounds like we've made some progress. Do either of you want to say anything to the other person? They look at me like, huh? Well, does anybody want to apologize? Oh, well, yeah, I'm sorry. And often it's like this. I don't agree with what you did, but I didn't mean to hurt you, so I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Or if it's gone really, really well, then these words come. Will you forgive me? So when I'm doing the mediation, I'm perfectly still, but inside I'm going, because all of the first 10 years that I did this, it was not Christian mediation, it was just secular mediation. So when they say, will you forgive me? I say, will you forgive her? So that's a beautiful moment. At the very end, whether or not there has been full agreement, just allow time for gratitude. Express appreciation for the listening that has been done, that's been huge, and the care that has been given, and the care for the relationship itself, and acknowledge at this time if there has been anything new learned. I was in an appointment a couple of weeks ago, and at the end, I wasn't sure how it went, and she just said, I learned so much about this that I didn't know about before. I felt like that was a very good investment of my 2 hours. I worked in Geneva with an entity of the World Council of Churches. There were 55 pastors from 40 different nations and 15 different Christian denominations. And when we started the year, one of the African priests, dressed in his full regalia and headdress, when he met me, he said, "It's wrong for a woman to be pastor." And then we had a year together. A year where we worked on things together, we learned each other's stories, and I learned his culture, and he learned about my culture, and we were just the dearest of friends. His name is Bosu. And it was the day to say goodbye. We all had our boxes and our bags all packed. We were moving back to our countries. I was moving back to the United States, and I just went over to Bosu to say goodbye. And he said, have decided it's all right for a woman to be pastor. And then he added, but it's wrong for a woman pastor to wear lipstick. So because I had gotten to know Bosu and his context and his community, I knew that women in his community who wear lipstick work in the evening. It was a cultural comment. It was not against me, it was not about me. We had accepted one another's differences. We had learned about one another. We had changed our minds. Both of us had changed our minds about the other. And this kind of dialogue, this kind of loving of one another and learning one another's heart, that's my hope for you. I'm going to pray. Holy Spirit, fall afresh on us today. We pray that you will be our guide. This afternoon, we ask that we will find ourselves surprised by what we hear, by what we find ourselves saying. We love you, Lord God. And because we all love you, there's our unity. Help us to find our way in this, and help us not to hurt each other. In the name of Christ, I pray. Amen.